Welcome to Hill Country Homilies, weekly homilies from Holy Annunciation Orthodox Church in Liberty Hill, Texas. Holy Annunciation is an old calendar Orthodox church, sharing the faith of the apostles and the love of Christ with all who seek his truth. Now let's listen to this week's homily.
Glory to Jesus Christ.
Glory forever.
Today we celebrate both the commemoration of the Holy Fathers of the first 6 ecumenical councils and the feast of the great Prince Vladimir, the baptizer of the Rus. Saint Vladimir is hymned as an equal to the apostles for his evangelical feats in converting the pagan Russian lands to Orthodox Christianity. It's a conversion that's lasted to this very day. Amidst many challenges of the faith, whether it was the invasions of the Tartars, the incursion of the Roman Germanic bishop of nobles, and the oppression of the godless communists, through it all the Russian people have stood firm in their faith. And on this double feast, the readings are extensive. We had 3 epistle readings, we had 3 gospel readings, and I want to speak a little bit, though, about the epistle reading that we would have had for this Sunday, regardless of what feast came with it. And that is the first epistle from the lectionary, which is Paul's epistle to the Romans, chapter 12, and we start in verse 6. And since it was somewhat buried in the 3 readings, I'm just going to read the epistle because it's not very long. Having then gifts differing according to the grace that is given us, whether prophecy, let us prophesy according to the proportion of faith, or ministry, let us wait on our ministering, or he that teacheth on teaching, or he that exhorteth on exhortation, he that giveth, let him do it with simplicity, he that ruleth with diligence, he that showeth mercy with cheerfulness. Let love be without dissimulation. Abhor that which is evil, cleave to that which is good. Be kindly affectioned one to another with brotherly love, in honor preferring one another. Not slothful in business, fervent in spirit, serving the Lord, rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, continuing instant in prayer, distributing to the necessity of the saints, given to hospitality. Bless them which persecute you, bless and curse not. In this relatively short reading, the apostle both calls the faithful to action in the ministry of the Lord, and he exhorts them to conduct themselves honorably and with good works in their way of life. It should not be lost on anyone that this epistle to the Romans, which we're reading, this exhortation on how we should live our lives and the good works that we should do, is the very same epistle that's often cited as the basis for a faith alone theology of salvation. Because in Romans, Paul does declare that the righteous shall live by faith, and that a person is justified by faith apart from the works of the law. But here, in the 12th chapter, Paul is focused on something a little different. Here, in speaking on the gifts of ministry that are given to the faithful, he first makes clear that these are not gifts that are given according to our merit. Rather, by the way, because a gift according to merit isn't a gift, it's a payment of a debt. Rather, he points out that these gifts are different for each according to the grace that's been given to us. So if one of the faithful is a great preacher and another is famed for teaching, and yet another is called to simply pray silently, this isn't because any one of them has made any special achievement. The message that Paul gives is one of humility. And it's a message that we need even today. Bishops, priests, deacons, readers, anyone who serves, anyone who sings, it's not anything that they've done that merits the ministry that they hold. It's merely a grace that's been given by God, the one that gives. And God forbid we should believe for 1 minute that any of us is better than the other. The meekest, the quietest, the least noticed person in the church who silently prays his or her prayer may be more filled with the grace of God than whoever's in the fanciest vestments They may offer the holiest prayers, the most efficacious prayers of all, because that may be the ministry that God has given them to quietly pray for the world or for the faithful or for whoever their prayers are offered for. So Paul is saying to those that are in the ministry, don't be proud and don't lay your gift to waste. Because when he says prophesy according to the proportion of the faith, it's a theme that he repeats for ministering, teaching, exhorting. What he's saying is, if you've been given this grace from God, you use the full portion of what you've been given. Not a half measure. Don't hold anything back. If your gift is small, you use every little bit of it. And if it's great, don't stop with just being good. Whatever grace God has given us, we're to use it to its fullest, the full proportion. And Paul continues with other exhortations which are towards our humility. He urges the Romans, in honor, prefer one another. That's an interesting saying, and we should probably ask, well, what does that mean? It says, be kindly affectioned, in honor, preferring one another. Well, basically, what that means is strive to be second. Place the others ahead of you. Don't contest for that highest place amongst your friends. Give it to them. In honor, prefer one another. John Chrysostom teaches that it's this kind of humility that engenders lasting love. He says this is the way that affection is produced, and also when produced that it abides. And there's nothing which makes friends so much as the earnest endeavor to overcome one's neighbor in honoring him. You know, think about it. I mean, it just appeals to us, right? When our neighbor is solicitous towards us, when our neighbor offers basically to put our needs above his own, we know that that's an offer of love. Paul calls on those in Rome to serve the Lord because service is, again, a mark of humility. He urges them to be patient in tribulation. And this also is a mark of humility. For those that rail against their tribulations are those who remain captive to pride. And they believe themselves too good to suffer or too great to be offended against. And truly, this is one of the greatest challenges we face in this present day, when it seems like it's almost the daily goal of much of our population to be as offended as possible, as often as possible. I do it too sometimes. I'm guilty. The wrong word, the wrong opinion, the wrong tone might set me right into mode of being offended. Such a little tribulation, right? You've offended me. Such a little tribulation. We don't even want to bear that in the slightest. That's pride. It's pride taking over. It's a belief that we're just too good to have to put up with a little offense. And when we look back in history, when we look at the patience, endurance of the apostles, of the martyrs of Christ himself, we just ought to slap ourselves in the face and say, what's wrong with us? What's wrong with me? And this same pride compounds itself in the damage it does to us spiritually, because it's not just that our sense of offense is aroused, it's what feeling offended does to us. Feeling offended steals our joy. Feeling offended disturbs our peace. We carry it inside of us. How can we show mercy with cheerfulness, which is what Paul says right before that? How can we let our love be without dissimulation when we're roused to anger and anxiety by the offense of another? And Paul exhorts the Romans to good works, urging them to distribute to the necessity of the saints and be given to hospitality. Now, I was having a little trouble with what this means, given to hospitality. But wouldn't you know that St. John Chrysostom had something to say about that too? He talks about how specific that exhortation is, because the translation to English, given to hospitality, is actually taken a Greek word which means pursuing. So he's really saying pursuing hospitality. And, well, what does that mean? It means don't sit and wait for someone to come to you before you give them hospitality. Pursue the opportunity to give that hospitality. Don't wait for them to come to us. Run to them. Be given to finding those in need of hospitality. Think about how we tend to treat people who are in the greatest need in our society. Do we run to them, or do we sort of push them away? Do we hope to avoid the panhandler? Maybe we grudgingly give them $1 or some spare change if they catch our eye, if we can't, get going real quickly at the stop sign before they get to our car. It sounds familiar to how we act today, but it's a story as old as humanity. Here was St. John Chrysostom in the 5th century. The 5th century. Not as we do if we happen to see a stranger or a poor man, knitting our brows and not deigning even to speak to them, and if after thousands of entreaties we're softened to bid our servant to give them just a trifle, and then we think we've done our duty. That was in the 5th century. St. John Chrysostom is describing basically how we act every time we stop at a stop sign and there's a panhandler on the corner. Paul says, no, don't be like this. Don't wait for them to approach us, but pursue them. Don't be beaten down by continued requests. Go and give before you're asked, and do it cheerfully. Don't complain. Don't mumble. Get a job under your breath. Don't decide that giving a pittance of $1 here or there will be enabling some habit you're presuming about the person in need. Go find them and minister to them. And we always say, well, I don't give because they're just going to go spend it on beer. They're just going to spend it on drugs. So this is what St. John said about this. If this person be a murderer, if they be a robber or whatnot, does he therefore seem to you not to deserve a loaf of bread or a few pence? And yet your master causes even the sun to rise upon him. And do you judge him unworthy of food even for a day? Our culture, brothers and sisters, our time, we look down, we huff, and we say, well, probably just spend it on booze or drugs, but the same sun will rise on them as it does on us every single morning. I'll tell you, when I started writing and preparing for this homily, I was just going to go through and talk about point by point what Paul had to say. And I got to this, and it just hit me between the eyes that in the 5th century, St. John Chrysostom is describing exactly the way that we still act today. It convicted me, because I do those things. Everything that Paul and St. John Chrysostom are telling me not to do, I've done them. And it just hit me square between the eyes, and I just stopped, because it was such a wake-up call, to think for how long this has gone on, and how badly even today, even as much as I try to be given to hospitality, to pursue the needs of others, I still fail just like they did back in the 5th century. So I'm going to stop here. I would commend you to read St. John Chrysostom's 21st homily on Romans and to pray for me, because until I can see that hungry murderer to be as deserving of a loaf of bread as I am, then I'm the murderer. I've murdered my fellow man on the altar of my own pride. So pray for me, and I'll pray that God grants each of us the pursuit of hospitality, of cheerful mercy that Paul urges us to. May God take away our modern cynicism, our suspicion of those of less fortune, and our sense of superiority over those in need. Instead, let us minister one to another according to the proportion of the faith that we've been given. May God have mercy on each of us when we die. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thanks for listening to Hill Country Homilies. For more information, visit Holy Annunciation Orthodox Church at www.annunciationtx.com. And please join us again next week.